We work so you can play.
Okay, so let's start by painting his armour. Now, with Space Marines in particular, there's a lot of armour, so obviously it's going to be the main colour on the model. For this particular case, I'm painting blue power armour. So the colours I'm going to use are Ultramarines blue, Enchanted blue, and Ice blue. Now, I will post up in the description or the article on MiniWarGaming.com exactly what the Vallejo equivalents are. I've also got two brushes. I've got a Citadel standard brush, and this is what we're going to be painting a lot of it with, and you can see it's got a fairly good point on it. And I've also got a 10-0 brush. This is Low Cornell. I believe you can get these in most hobby stores, although a Citadel Fine Detail will work, or Army Painter equivalent. So let's crack on. I'm going to take the Ultramarines blue. Now, a point of note with all of my paints, I never paint with unwatered down paint. So this paint has been watered down exactly 2 to 1 paint to water. So for every 2 drops of paint, or every two amounts of paint, there is 1 amount of water. It helps it flow onto the model, it helps it flow out of your brush. I know a lot of people, and myself included, who use a tiny bit of flow improver as well, and that further enhances how the paint flows off the brush onto the model. So we'll leave that there. In fact, always give it a good shake. And you can see I've mounted the model on a suitable handle. This is for me, I prefer having a large handle because it stops my hand that isn't painting from cramping up. And I've already based him, so it's just the model to paint. So quite simply, load the brush up with some paint. So I've not got a lot on, you can see here. And we'll just start painting the power armour. So I'll paint a leg on camera, and then I'll let you guys do the rest. So quite simply, just start applying the paint to the model, trying to get the coat as even as possible. And you can see already how this watered down paint doesn't leave brush marks on the actual model itself when I'm applying the paint. Now, I like to leave black areas as my shadow. A lot of painters don't like black as the shadow because you don't technically get black shadow in real life. However, we're not painting things to resemble real life, we're painting things to resemble models. And we want them to look as best as we can get them. And I think by black lining and by having black shadows, you actually enhance the look of these models. So just get a little bit under there. Get right down. Now I'm being quite liberal with the paint because I want a decent coat to work off with for the layer on top that is going to be the next stage. And don't worry if you make any mistakes, because we'll be painting over those areas anyway. Okay, so there you can see the base of the leg is done. So what I'm going to do now is just pause the video, paint the rest of the armour in the same way. And there's no specific technique for specific parts, it's literally just painting up what you need to be that colour, and we'll come back as soon as I've finished. So here we can see I've finished all of the base coating for the armour. I've literally painted all the panels in the Ultramarine's blue, leaving black wherever I don't want this colour. So we can move on to the next stage. Now the next stage is what's called a layering stage. On this sort of armour I typically only do one layer unless it's a competition piece, for example, but in your average everyday painting for armies, or to a certain extent higher quality table painting, you'll want to layer at least once. So for this layer I'm going to use Enchanted Blue, and the same with the Ultramarine's blue. It's been watered down 2:1 with water and a little bit of flow improver. So let's get on with it. Now what I'm aiming to do is have a brush strokes width. So now that's a standard brush strokes width of the Ultramarine blue, of the Enchanted Blue, all the way around the Ultramarine blue armour. And what that will give us is a layer that your eyes can't readily discern. By that I mean it has a tough time trying to distinguish between the Ultramarines and the Enchanted, because they're such a similar colour in shade. Now the Enchanted is slightly more saturated, meaning it has more blue in it, and a slightly darker colour as well. So what that will give us is a really nice shaded effect on the edges of the armour, to be highlighted with the ice blue, which will give a brilliant contrast on the edges. So the same as before, I shall paint a leg and then pause the video to do the rest. I'll start with this leg right here. Using the standard brush, just load up the paint. And this is going to be a fairly thick line, so paint it around all of the edges of the armour. I don't know if you can see how thick that line is. Even the camera has trouble picking it up. I shall put up some stills once the model is completed. So it's really quite a large layer on top of the Ultramarine's blue. And the same up above, where the knee joint begins. Now with Space Marines I tend to follow it underneath the knee pad as well. And then over the top of the foot. To join back up. So it's quite a simple stage, but the effect that it gives is quite dramatic on the end result of the model. So I shall just do the thigh very quickly as well. Now a thing to note about the layer is we can see that these fingers are actually smaller than the width of the brush stroke that we're now painting. So what that means is that the entirety of the fingers will be in Enchanted Blue. And there will be no Ultramarines blue showing through. So knowing that, we can paint all of the fingers, leaving black as the recess colour. So there we go. So once again I'm going to pause the video and do the same technique all the way around, and I shall come back and show you what I've done. Okay, so let's have a look at where I've painted the enchanted blue on the armour. So, like we saw when I did paint on camera, I've painted it all around the edges of the normal power armour, on the back of the feet, on the back armour, on top of the power pack. But I've also put 2 strips of enchanted blue on the inside of the shoulder pads. And the reason for that is we're not going to highlight the very edge of this blue, but it will give it a little bit of shading before it hits the very edges of the shoulder pads. So the next stage we need to do after this is the highlight, and we're only going to use one highlight. I'm going to use Ice Blue by GW, or I believe it's Electric Blue by Vallejo, and this is where our 10-0 brush is going to come into play. So let's give it a good shake. Now the technique for painting highlights is, again, very simple. We're just looking for the thinnest line of paint we can get on the model itself. So I'll paint a few example areas and then pause the video again. So with just a tiny amount on the brush, I'll paint inside here. Just a little line on the very edge of the armour. Once more. That's literally all it is. We can continue to do this around all of the edges of the plate. I find using a smaller brush really helps. A lot of people like to use a slightly larger brush with a decent point, but it's all up to opinion. So we can actually use the side of the bristles, in this case, to paint the edges of the backpack. Which gives that effect. So let's do one more example. Now this might not be very visible on the actual camera itself, but you will see from the stills at the end of this video exactly where I've painted the ice blue. So I'm going to pause again and do the whole model, and we'll see how it looks after that.